Okay, so let us start. Again, I'm Priyanshi, and I'll be taking your classes for drug regulatory affairs. And before we dive into the technical side of regulatory affairs, let me just ask you a very simple question. Okay, so before we dive into the technical side, let me ask you when you hear the word regulation in healthcare or pharmaceuticals, what comes to your mind? Maybe a one word answer would suffice. So, what do you really understand by the word regulation in healthcare or pharmaceuticals? Just type your answers in the chat box so I am able to understand if you are in the receipt of the questions that I'm asking. And it can be like an interactive session since it's the first class. Right, safety and efficacy of products is an appropriate answers. It not only deals with the foreign policy, it also deals with local regulations and laws. It also deals with national regulations and laws, and it also deals with the foreign policies. Okay, so instead of jumping directly to the foreign policies, we let's just start with the local laws and regulations, move towards the national laws and regulations, and then go up to the foreign policy. Okay, so do anyone has any other answer to the question what regulation is in your mind? Okay, have any of you ever taken a medicine and wondered who, decided it was safe or how it got approved? Because a medicine cannot be brought into the market overnight, right? It needs to undergo a lot of process and clearance before it is marketed or introduced into the market. So, did the question who decided it was safe and how it got approved ever occur to you? Because since you're here in the Diploma of Regulatory Affairs, I'm guessing the questions might have came up and might have raised a curiosity for you to be here. So, okay, let's take an example of a very recent COVID-19 vaccine, which was a prime example of regulatory authorities in real time and what did they do to get the drug in the market under a pressurized situation, right? So we all know the journey of COVID-19 vaccine, how the molecule was identified, how it got fast track approval, and how it got to the market. Once it was in the market, how the post marketing surveillance happened, and the clearance for COVID-19 vaccine to be safe and effective was underlined, right? So, okay, that was, I guess, the briefing for your DRA course. We'll move to the topics that we are going to discuss in today's session. I'll just share the slide again. So the four things that we will be covering in today's sessions is first your understanding of drug regulatory affairs. Second would be a regulatory framework and key bodies. Third would be the entire drug development process. And lastly, we will talk about challenges and future trends in drug regulatory affairs. This session is just an overview of what we are going to cover in the coming sessions, coming classes. We'll take up each topic individually to understand it deeply and in a very descriptive way. Okay, so let's start with the introduction. So, drug regulatory affairs is a vital function within the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical devices industry. Okay, all the three industries: pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device industries. Okay, before moving forward, I would also request you, if you find that there are anything that needs to be penned down, please go ahead and make notes of what I'm saying if you feel that there it might come up later in the class. Okay, And if you don't understand something, just uh, drop that topic in the chat box so that we can take up the doubts and questions in the next session. Okay. Okay, so now we will start the class. Drug regulatory affairs. So it is a vital function within three sectors: pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device industries. It ensures that the companies comply with all the regulations and laws pertaining to the development, approval, manufacturing, and marketing of the drugs. Okay, three industries: pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical devices. Why? To ensure that the companies comply with all the regulations and laws pertaining to development, approval, manufacturing, and marketing of drugs and health products in different countries. Okay, so let's start with the definition. Regulatory affairs refers to the regulatory affairs refers to the specialized field that manages the interface between pharmaceutical companies and regulatory authorities. And the person who is responsible for managing the interface is referred to as a drug regulatory affair professional or a DRA professional. Okay. Why is this important? To again ensure compliance with laws and regulations governing drug development and marketing. Next, very familiar term that you're going to come across in our sessions is dossier. Okay, so what is a dossier? Dossier is basically your comprehensive collection of documents which are submitted to the regulatory agencies and contains all the necessary data for drug approvals, including clinical trial results, manufacturing processes, and labeling information. Not just these, but rather a lot of information which you can refer to in ICH guidelines. I will tell you which guidelines to refer to after we finish this session, so that you have a better understanding of what all goes into the dossiers, right? And lastly, you'll come across terms like NDA, ANDA, INDA, BLA application, or MAA. These are all the abbreviations which mean different things. For example, NDA and ANDA refers to new drug applications and abbreviated new drug applications. So new drug application is for your for the marketing approval of a new drug, while the abbreviated is for the generic drugs, allowing for a streamlined review process based on existing safety and efficacy data. Okay, so if a drug is already approved under new drug application, and if you have to file a generic drug application, it will go under ANDA, and you only have to submit the bioequivalence study of those of the drug in question, based on all the safety and efficacy data that was already submitted in the new drug application. Okay, so the process become less extensive when you're submitting a ANDA application as compared to the new drug application. Okay, moving forward, role of sorry role of affair professional, or a DRA, drug regulatory affair professional. Okay, so the first thing that the DRA needs to do is to ensure compliance. Okay, a regulatory affair professional is responsible to ensure that the pharmaceutical products comply with all relevant laws and regulations, which is crucial for maintaining public safety and product integrity. Without compliance, a drug cannot be approved and cannot be marketed. Okay, so the first thing that a DRA professional needs to make sure of is the compliance, that the drug is following all the rules and regulations, all the relevant laws that are laid down by respective countries or local guidelines, in order to be compliant, in order to be safe, and in order to maintain the integrity of the product. The second thing that a DRA professional needs to do is documentation management. When we talk about regulatory documentation, is again a very important process to file submissions, okay, or the applications that we talked about last, NDA, ANDA, BLA, these are all submitted as documents, and the management of the documents is the role of a DRA professional. Okay, they prepare, review, and submit all the essential regulatory documents such as NDAs, INDs. INDs are your investigational new drug application. BLAs are your biological license application, which to ensure that all submissions meet the stringent requirements set by the regulatory authority. Again, when we talk about stringent requirement, we are referring to the stringent regulatory authorities like USA, like EMA, like PMDA, etc. So, if a drug is getting approval from all these regulatory bodies, then it becomes easier for that drug to get approval in the non regulated market, row countries, African continents, etc. Okay, so documentation is of top priority when we're talking about what a role of drug regulatory professional is. And lastly, the strategic consultation. Once you have enough knowledge of what regulations are, how documentation is prepared, how is it submitted, you can provide your consultation to the manufacturing plant or the companies who want to submit their applications to the regulatory bodies. So regulatory professionals provide strategic guidance to development teams, advising on the regulatory pathways and potential challenges, thereby facilitating smoother drug development processes. Apart from these, product lifecycle management comes under the role of regulatory professional, which talks about labeling updates, post marketing surveillance, and change controls. We will talk about what these uh, word mean in coming classes, but since this is an overview class, we'll just try to cover a brief of what we are going to discuss. Okay, apart from compliance management and consultation, the DRA also needs to be very efficient in communication, because without communication you will not be able to put in your queries or your questions to the regulatory agencies or the manufacturing plant or the marketing authorization holder who is filing the application. So, in order to ensure a smooth communication between the regulatory body and the manufacturing plant, the DRA needs to be very efficient and must have a hold on the communication skills, without which you will not be able to survive the industry. So, it is very important for you to be efficient. Okay, so these are the role of regulatory affair professional. It's a vast industry, and the roles differ as the project differs. Okay, so these are just the overview of what you have to do. We'll move on to why DRA is important, the professionals are important, and why it is important in public health. Okay, so first thing is your public health protection, second is your crisis management, and third is your access to innovation. So the regulatory affair professional ensures, and the regulatory guidelines ensures that the drugs are rigorously evaluated for safety, efficacy before reaching the market, thus safeguarding public health and minimizing risk associated with the pharmaceutical product. Second is your crisis management. In the event of adverse drug reaction, take for example, a drug has been marketed, the patients are taking the drug, but there is an adverse drug reaction that has been reported. So, who will take care of that adverse drug reaction? So, there's the pharmacovigilance team in action, there's a regulatory team in action, which play a critical role in monitoring, reporting, and managing these issues to protect consumers and maintain trust in healthcare system. And the last one is your access to innovation by streamlining the approval process, because drug approval process can be very tedious and very extensive. So once it is streamlined by a regulatory professional for new therapies and vaccines, regulatory affairs facilitate timely access to innovative treatments. The best example for the innovative treatment is your COVID-19 vaccine. The pandemic happened, the vaccine came, It got approved in under stressful situations, addressing all the health challenges that might occur, acting on the adverse actions, and improving patient outcomes. So regulatory affair professionals are a key person responsible to make sure that everything is streamlined, the approval is done timely, and everything related to the drug approval is maintained, right? So these are all the importance of regulatory affairs professional and regulatory affair in public health. Okay, so moving on to the regulatory framework and key bodies. I hope you've understood what regulatory affairs is, what a regulatory affair professional does, what is the importance of regulatory affairs in public health. Although we will take up the applications individually in the next sessions, but I hope a brief of what I've just said is clear to everyone. So maybe just give a thumbs up in the chat box before we move to the regulatory framework and key bodies. Okay, so do you have any questions till now? Just if you have any question, raise the questions in the chat box. I'll address them later in the class or maybe in the next session. I'll give you a minute to think of what we've read. I'll just share the slide share once again. Okay, so moving on to the excuse me. Moving on to the key components. Moving on to the regulatory framework and key bodies. Let's understand what the regulatory framework is and what are the key bodies that are responsible for that, for the laying down of the framework and the approval of the drugs. Okay, so a regulatory framework refers to the laws, guidelines, and processes that govern the development, testing, approval, manufacturer, and marketing of pharmaceutical products. Okay, what is it? It is the laws, guidelines, and processes that govern the development, testing, approval, manufacturer, and marketing of pharmaceutical product. It ensures safety, efficacy, and quality of public health. Okay, there are a lot of components to the regulatory framework. The first one is your legislation. Okay, national drug laws, example, Drug and Cosmetic Act in India, FDC Act in USA, that provide legal authority for regulation. Then is your guidelines. It can be international guide. Okay, it can be international guidelines or national guidelines. Example, ICH, WHO, GXP. which offers scientific and ethical standards. Just note down the pointers, the components of the regulatory framework. The first one is your legislation, the second one is your guidelines, the third one is your product life cycle regulation. Okay, so when we talk about product life cycle regulations, it is basically the rules that are there for every stage. Take, for example, clinical trials to marketing and then to post marketing surveillance. The fourth component to the regulatory framework is your marketing authorization. Once the drug is approved, the the marketing authorization is provided to the either a manufacturing plant or to the marketing authorization holder for new or generic drugs. This marketing authorization requires CTD and ECTD dossiers. We have a specific session related to the CTDs and ECTD dossiers. We'll talk about them there. Then your next component of regulatory framework is pharmacovigilance, which is your post-marketing safety monitoring and adverse event reporting. And the last one is your inspections and audits, after which you get your GMP certificate, your GLP certificate, your GCP certificate, etc. Okay. So the key components of the regulatory framework are your legislation, guidelines, product lifecycle regulation, marketing authorization, pharmacovigilance, inspection, and audits. Okay. These are your regulatory bodies: FDA, EMA, WHO, there is CDSCO in India, PMDA in Japan, there is NMPA in China, Health Canada, Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA in Australia, Anvisa in Brazil, South Africa has SAFRA, and Russia has Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation. So there are a lot of international authorities and national authorities. We'll take up a few authorities here right now. First one would be your FDA, which is based in US. Full name is Food and Drug Administration, and the key responsibilities of the FDA is to approve new drugs, generics, biologics, oversee clinical trials, which comes under IND applications, and ensures GMP labeling pharmacovigilance. The second one is your EMA, which is European Medicine Agency. Key responsibilities of EMA are to centralize the drug approval across European member state, scientific evaluation and supervision, and to work with national authorities like MHRA in UK, ANSM in France. Okay. Then is your India's CDSCO, Central Drug Standard Control Organization. The head of CDSCO is referred to as DCGI, Drug Controller General of India. And the key responsibilities of CDSCO includes regulation of drug approvals, clinical trials, quality standards, and to oversee the import and export along with the post-marketing surveillance. Okay. Then is your Japan PMDA. PMDA stands for Pharmaceutical and Medical Device Agency. Its key responsibilities are to review your drug applications, monitor the safety, and work on and also again PMDA works under Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare. Okay. Um, FDA is a standalone authority, EMA is a standalone authority, but PMDA here works under the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, Japan. Okay. Then is your World Health Organization, which set global health standards, offers pre-qualification for medicines and vaccines used in global health programs, and also it issues guidelines, example GMP and bioequivalence. Next is your China NMPA, which stands for National Medicinal Product Administration. Formerly, it was called as CFDA, but now it's referred to as NMPA. Key responsibilities of NMPA includes regulation of drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, aligning more closely with ICH and international standards. Other notable agencies, like I've told you, Health Canada, Therapeutic Good Administration, Anvisa, SAFRA, etc. Okay, so these are all your regulatory bodies that are responsible for approval of a drug molecule or a new drug application, abbreviated drug application, investigational new drug application, etc. Moving on, functions of the regulatory authorities or the regulatory bodies. So the key aspect of a regulatory authority is to ensure drug safety, to evaluate and approve pharmaceutical products, to ensure they meet established safety, efficacy, and quality standards before they can be marketed to the public. Okay, so see, we've talked about a lot of agencies, right? There are more than 30, 40 agencies all over the world which are responsible for the regulations. Okay, so we cannot submit dossiers as per, we cannot change the dossiers every time we're submitting a new drug application or an abbreviated new drug application. So WHO and ICH came together, sat and harmonized the regulations globally for uh, to streamline the process and for better and faster drug approvals, right? So why that globalization, sorry, why the harmonization globally of the regulation was importance was of was important. It was important because it set up the consistent standard across all the countries. It facilitates smoother international trades, and it also ensures that the drugs meet safety and efficacy requirements universally. Okay, the key organizations again that were involved are the ICH, International Council of Harmonization, and WHO, World Health Organization, which played pivotal roles in developing guidelines that promote regulatory consistency among member countries. And how have we benefited from that? Since harmonized regulation reduce duplication of efforts in clinical trials and submission, they accelerate the approval processes for new drugs and timely enhance patient access to innovative therapies worldwide. Okay, what is the impact of regulatory framework on drug development? Harmonizing the global regulations, the regulatory bodies, when all of these come together, they have a huge impact and influence on the development timelines. So, the regulatory framework significantly impacts drug development timelines, as stringent compliance requirements can lead to extended review periods and delays in the market entry, necessitating careful planning and resource allocation by pharmaceutical companies. Stringent bodies have a lot of regulation that needs to be fulfilled. The drug needs to qualify them in order to get the approval and be marketed. So the regulatory bodies, along with WHO and ICH, harmonized the guidelines in a manner that those review periods can be shortened and the drug can get faster approvals and be marketed without any delays. Okay, so if you have any questions related to the regulatory framework on drug development or the regulatory bodies, just write those questions down in the chat box and then we'll move forward to the drug development process. Students, please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box so I know what is it that you're not understanding, because if there are no doubts, then maybe the topic is very easy or you're not understanding any of it. So I would request, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat box. Okay, moving forward to the drug development process. So, drug development process is a complex journey that ensures a new drug is safe, effective, and of high quality before it reaches the patients. Okay, so we'll take up the drug development process one step at a time, and we'll start with drug discovery. So the first step to drug development is initial drug discovery, which begins with the target identification and compound screening for potential therapeutic effects. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to target identification, example, a protein causing a disease, then go forward with the compound screening and lead compound selection and optimization. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is you have to identify potential new drug compounds. Okay, the time frame can be 2 years to 5 years because identifying a new compound takes a lot of time than it takes for the approval process. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is drug discovery. Once the drug has been discovered with the target identification, you move on to the preclinical testing or preclinical studies which are conducted to evaluate the safety and biological activity in laboratory setting and animal models. It can be in vitro, it can be in vivo. There can be toxicity studies that need to be performed, which can be acute toxicity, subchronic toxicity, or chronic toxicity. Then we also have to study the pharmacokinetics, the ADME of the drug, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Okay, once the preclinical studies or preclinical testings are done, the output is your investigational new drug application for FDA, EMA, or CDSCO. The time for preclinical studies can be from 1 to 2 years, and once you file your investigational new drug application, you get the approval for performing the clinical trials. Okay, so the drug was discovered, preclinical testings were done, INDA was filed, you get the approval, you start performing your clinical trials. Now, clinical trials again has three phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 has 20 to 100 healthy volunteers, and the objective is safety and dosage of the drug product. The key focus is tolerability and side effects. Then, um, the phase 1 clinical trial moves to phase 2 clinical trial, which is conducted on more than 100 to 500 patients to understand the efficacy and side effects of the drug in question and focus on dose response and short term risk. Once clinical phase 2 is cleared, the drug moves to the phase 3 trial where more than 1,000 participants, up to 5,000 participants, are being tested for the drug to confirm and to compare the efficacy and monitor the adverse drug reaction. Once your clinical trial is done, you get to file your new drug application. Okay, what we have done till here is we have discovered we've talked about drug discovery, we've talked about preclinical testing. Once the preclinical testing is performed, we move to filing an INDA application, which is investigational new drug application, to FDA, EMA, CDSCO, which gives you the authority to perform clinical trials. Once the clinical trials, all the three phases are conducted, then you can file your application for new drug application. The time frame for this clinical trial can be 6 to 7 years. This is the extensive timeline that I'm talking about. In emergency situation, there are fast track approvals that happens all the time. So when I say 6 to 7 years, it's when you have a lot of time, you're working on a new medicine, you are doing a research, everything. Okay, so clinical trials can take more than 6 to 7 years also, or even lesser, depends on the type of molecule we're talking about. Then comes your regulatory review and approval. Okay, So the main objective of regulatory review and approval is to obtain is to obtain approval to market the drug. So regulatory submissions are done to FDA, EMA, CDSCO. In FDA, you file an NDA for a new drug application or BLA for a biologicals. Okay. In EMA, you file for marketing authorization application, and in India, CDSCO, you file for Form 44 or NDAC review. Okay. The time frame for getting the approval can be again around 1 to 2 years. Once the drug has been approved and gets the approval to be marketed, post marketing surveillance, which is phase 4 of clinical trial, happens, whose objective is to monitor drug safety and long term effects after approval. The key activities that are involved in post marketing surveillance are pharmacovigilance, risk management plans, real world evidences, which may lead to label updates, restrictions, or even withdrawal if safety risks emerges. Okay. So total time from discovery to market is around 10 to 15 years with billions and billions of dollars in investment. Okay. So, regulatory bodies make sure that all the hard work that's been put into the drug discovery to the preclinical testing and clinical trial results to post marketing surveillance is not gone without supervision, without compliance. It makes sure that everything falls within the guidelines and rules and restrictions that are laid down by the respective regulatory bodies. Okay, so this is the whole process of drug development, drug discovery to market and post marketing surveillance. Okay, so these are your overview to what investigational new drug is, what new drug application is. We will take them individually in our coming sessions. Here I've given you an overview. Let's revise that again. INDA is an application which is a critical step that allows sponsors to begin clinical trials in humans. It requires comprehensive data on drugs pharmacology, toxicology, manufacturing processes, along with a detailed clinical trial protocol to ensure participant safety and regulatory compliance. Then is your NDA, which is submitted for marketing approval of new drugs requiring extensive evidence of safety and efficacy from clinical trials. In contrast, the abbreviated new drug application facilitates the approval of generic drug by demonstrating bioequivalence to an already approved reference drug, thus streamlining the pathway for market entry. Okay. Then is your post-marketing surveillance and its importance. Post-marketing surveillance is essential for identifying adverse drug reactions, long-term effects that may not have been evident during clinical trials, ensuring ongoing safety and efficacy of pharmaceutical products in the general population. This process involves systemic collection and analysis of data on drug performance post-approval, which is crucial for regulatory compliance, allowing authorities to take necessary actions such as label changes, warnings, or market withdrawals if safety concern arises. When we talk about label changes, I'll give you an example of label changes so that it becomes easier for you to understand what happens after post marketing surveillance. Just give me a second. Okay, so uh, I hope we all know about the Brexit, the exit of UK from European Union, right? So when UK was a part of European Union, the drug products that were marketed there, the labels that were used, it had a line which said authorized by EMA, or the drug is manufactured in Europe. Okay, but post Brexit, the MHRA, which is your regulatory body of United Kingdom, they've laid down several labeling changes which ensures that the product is only marketed in UK and not in Europe. Since the guidelines have changed, it became a mandatory thing for the drugs that are only marketed in UK to have a line on the label which said UK only. Okay, so that was a labeling change that needed to be updated. So to update that change, the manufacturing plant or the marketing authorization holder filed an application filed an application for labeling update, and the dossier were prepared. The labeling change was mentioned in the dossier, and it got submitted to the regulatory body in order to get the approval that yes, that labeling change can be enforced in the United Kingdom, right? So that was an example of a label change. There can be a adverse reaction which was reported in post marketing surveillance, which needs to be incorporated into the labeling. That again needs to be filed in the dossiers and submitted to the regulatory body for approval before it can be updated and marketed in the country. Okay, so post marketing surveillance is very important for all the labeling changes, warnings, or marketing withdrawal if there are any safety concerns which might arise during long term surveillance. Okay, so that's why PM post marketing surveillance is of utmost importance. Next, we will move to the challenges and future trends in regulatory affairs. See, when there were no electronic submissions happening, there was a common technical document that was in practice where piles and piles of papers were submitted to the regulatory body. Paperwork was extensive, and it led to a lot of delays in the drug approval. Okay, so we moved from that to ECTD. ECTD is your electronic common technical documentation, which which prevents the extensive paperwork and everything. You can easily submit your dossiers through a electronic gateway to the regulatory bodies, to the marketing authorization holders, and it makes the reviewing process easier, lesser time consuming, and eventually leading to better approvals, faster approvals. Okay, so the challenge we faced was paperwork, extensive documentation, which led us to electronic submissions. And who knows, in the coming in the coming years, we might just need AI to do the submissions, which I think is a very difficult process in this case, because again, extensive documentation is required in regulatory body. Therefore, surveillance or a surveillance from a regulatory affair professional would be very important even in the coming futures. So having the knowledge of how we've evolved, what the challenges we faced, and what comes into the future is very important. And you need to accept the changes in order to keep evolving with the ever-changing regulations. Okay, so okay, again, current challenges in regulatory affairs, evolving regulatory landscape. Every day the guidelines are changing. The speed that fast track approvals are in motion. Safety is again of top priority. So the rapid advancement of technology and drug development methodologies present significant challenges for regulatory affair professionals who must continuously adapt to new regulations and guidelines while ensuring compliance without stifling innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. And there is an increasing pressure to expedite the drug approval processes, because the diseases are ever changing, ever evolving. There are no repetitive disease. Every day there's a new disease in the market which needs a new medicine, which needs to be approved. So uh, there's immense pressure to expedite the drug approval process in order to meet urgent public health needs, particularly during health crisis. This necessitates a delicate balance between ensuring thorough safety and evaluations and facilitating timely access to potential life-saving therapies. Okay, so this was all about a brief introduction to what regulatory is, what are the key components of regulatory framework, what are the regulatory bodies, what does a regulatory affair professional does, and what are the challenges that a regulatory person faces in everyday life, and how we can what we can do to overcome that. Okay, in next classes we will talk about module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4, and module 5. Module 4 and module 5 are more of clinical trial data. We will only have an overview of that, but we will focus on module 1 to module 3 in detail. So I would request you all to read about ICH guidelines, M4QR1. Please write it down, M4QR1 guidelines. Everybody is requested to read about M4QR1 guidelines so that you have a better understanding of what I am referring to, what I'm telling, and it'll be like a one-on-one conversation. So yeah, that is it from my side for this class. If you have any questions, just write them down in the chat box. And I also have a question for you all. Would it be okay if we take the classes on Thursdays after 7:30 p.m. in the evening to 8:30, or are you comfortable in doing the Sunday classes 1 to 2? Please give your suggestions so that we can manage the schedule accordingly. 7:30 to 8:30 on Thursdays, or 1 to 2 p.m. on Sundays. You'll be comfortable in which session? Sunday 3 to 4 can't be done. I've given you an option, either Sunday 1 to 2 or Thursdays. Okay, noted for Sunday classes. We will continue with the Sunday classes. Maybe there might be a slight change in the time. Um, the team will let you know. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, write them down and have a good day.